Hey there, hi, my name is Nadia and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be covering a little bit more of a vulnerable topic, so I've come equipped with my tea. So right at the forefront of this video, I would like to say that it's not going to be a sad video. I am not in a dark place right now. I'm actually in quite a joyful chapter of my life and I'm feeling really good and cared for. However, it's been on my mind to create content around mental health, and I think the most authentic way to get into that is by sharing where I come from and my own experience. I've found it incredibly helpful and comforting when I've watched other content creators on this platform and seen on other social media platforms share works about mental health. I believe that all stories are different, and once again, that content is not a replacement for therapy or mental health treatment. That's very important. But I do believe that there is a power in watching and ingesting content that not only informs but resonates with us and makes us feel, as cliche as it sounds, less alone. So while I am typically one to mince words, I think the best way to start off my mental health story is just by being open and saying that I have anxiety and depression. I have struggled with anxiety and depression for multiple years of my life, and mental health and mental illness has never been a stranger. I'll put up the number here, but mental illness impacts many of us. It did so in my family and to certain members in my life around me. Beyond experiences with family members, I now connect moments of feeling like there was something heavy on my chest, and I felt incredibly disconnected as I was sitting on the bus in high school, being driven on that long drive home, wishing I could immediately transport myself into the comfort and safety of my own room. I remember feeling like I was having trouble breathing when I was sitting in the church pews and looking around and seeing all these calm faces and feeling alone, that I felt so panicky. I remember a few years in, I was having a lot of trouble getting my work in on time, especially towards the end of the semester for university. I often categorized it as laziness, but looking back, this kind of fear that gripped my chest when I was looking at the workload that I needed to do, or sometimes even the thought of needing to step out of my bed in the morning. That wasn't laziness. That wasn't something that was a character flaw. It was my mental health. I did hear words such as anxiety and wellness floating around when I was in university. I would say that's when I first got introduced. I took a Psychology 101 course and 102 course, as I'm sure many of us did when we were trying to rack up the credits. And becoming a little bit more familiar, I did start to identify symptoms within myself of anxiety, and I did place that onto my experience. However, I didn't go about in a way to care for my mental well-being beyond just visiting a student counselor whenever things felt incredibly stressful and difficult, and speaking about workloads and strategies to study better and eliminate procrastination, which, is a lifelong journey, I suppose. But despite the free counseling, trying to convince myself that it was just final stress and heading into each new semester optimistically thinking, I'll just work harder, I'll study smarter, and everything will be better. Each time got more challenging than the last. The final semester of university got so bad that I almost didn't graduate. I felt incredibly overwhelmed by the workload and frozen, feeling as though I was panicking and I was going to fail and ruin everything. Meanwhile, I didn't feel like I had the strength or the capacity to even get out of bed to work on the assignments that were overdue. It actually took the admissions office reaching out to me and checking in about what my course grades were for me to have a rush of energy from the panic of the risk of not graduating to reach out to my counselor for a mental health note to send to my professors for extensions. And while I managed to scrap it together enough to put a cap and gown on, it shook me a little bit, but I still totaled it all up to university jitters and stress and having too much on my plate throughout my school years. It wasn't until 2019 when there was a lot of new going on in my life and I hit a breaking point in the summer. A breaking point so bad that I had to leave the office that I worked in, go downstairs into a random parking lot just so I felt like I could breathe. And I ended up calling my mom in a fit of tears, crying about how I didn't feel good enough. I felt like I was failing as a daughter and a friend and a girlfriend. It just felt like life was expecting me to hold so many plates up, and my arms were just so tired. I felt like I was literally dropping the ball. I'm incredibly fortunate to have supportive family members, and I think having a support system has just been pivotal in terms of me getting to a solid place with my mental health, because right away my mom said, just come stay with us. And I did that. I took some time off and I went to my parents' home, and I remember staying in my pajamas all day and sleeping, and during the daytime hours living slowly with my family, and also taking small steps into trying to address the things that had stressed me out. That year was quite transformative for me. I was very much a person that felt very open and excited about the world as I was entering it post-graduation. And I had to make the heartbreaking decision to say no to a lot of the things and the people that had entered my life between those points, because I wasn't well and I didn't have the emotional capacity to juggle. But I also recognized the importance of boundaries for myself, and that if a relationship, in whatever capacity that be, was making me feel down or unsupported or felt incredibly exhausting and unhealthy, then I needed to let it go, because I was having a really hard time even holding my head up, much less all of the additional weight that I felt that I had on my shoulders. So yeah, 2019 was a big year for me. I made a lot of changes. I emerged from that summer with fewer friends, single, changing the way that I spent my money, and I had to research and push and get on a wait list just to make it into therapy. But I felt very desperate at the time, and fortunately for me, there was a little community center in my neighborhood that offered 10 free sessions, and that felt like such a gift. They sat down and spoke with me in administration and then connected me with a therapist that they felt fit my needs. And she has just been so wonderful. I feel so lucky and privileged to have connected with her and to have had those 10 free sessions, because back in 2019, I wouldn't have been able to afford therapy. Quite frankly, mental health accessibility is challenging, and I'm incredibly privileged in saying that. That's a video topic for another day, but I will be leaving some resources down below if you too struggle with getting access to therapy. I guess one thing that I should mention is my perspective in 2019. I had connected and resonated with having anxiety, but I had a very negative view of mental health and mental illness beyond that. I do remember saying to my partner at the time during the summer that one of my greatest fears was that I would be crazy and that I wouldn't know it, and everyone else around me would see me going further and further from myself, but I would just be completely unaware. And looking back on that now, that saddens me. It just goes to show that there is stigma about mental illness, and I was partaking in that. A lot of people struggle, and that fear, it showed that I was feeding into that stigma, that I viewed mental illness as something to be feared and avoided at all costs. And so when initially I was trying to treat my mental illness, I tried to heal it. I tried to overcome it. I tried to make it better. And I spent all summer doing that. It wasn't until I made all of those changes and came out of the summer quite different and finally had access to therapy that things very slowly started shifting. I slowed down. I spent a lot more time with fewer people that knew me more and I felt safe and comfortable with. I started partaking in the quote unquote boring activities that I really enjoy doing. I don't know if it's because I'm a Taurus, but that was where the shift came in, because very slowly but surely I was starting to listen to myself. It did not happen overnight. I definitely was still pushing myself a bit beyond my boundaries in terms of going out and saying yes to things that I felt like I should because I was in my early 20s and I'm young and I should live life to the fullest, when really I think living your life to the fullest means living in whatever ways brings you fulfillment. And for me, that's caring for myself better and slowing down so that I can be more present and I can be more involved in the activities that I do and the people that I spend my time with. But it took me some more time to get there. So I'm just going to skip ahead and get to the lowest point that I have yet experienced, which many of you may relate, was in 2020. I had lost my job temporarily and I was stuck at home with my thoughts. And that's when things got dark. I hadn't realized how much I associated my identity with my job title, which again, different video, but without it, I felt lost. And once again, I went where I always go when I'm feeling overwhelmed, which was to my parents' home, and I quarantined with them. Many of the days I was not able to will myself to get out of bed until 2, 3 in the afternoon, and quite frankly, it was just to keep up decent appearances with my family and not worry them too much. I remember feeling so low that my therapist, who, bless her for putting in a what's it called? I'll pop the word on the screen, but I was able to pay within my budget because it had changed a bit when I was unemployed. And I remember reaching out and booking appointment after appointment with my therapist, but not feeling up to being on a video call with her. So I would go out into my parents' suburban neighborhood and I would just walk and talk on the phone to my therapist and cry. I cry often in the sunny and the rainy seasons, but it was a heavy type of crying. It was a type of crying that you feel a bit of pain and shame and guilt about past mistakes and who I was, and just ripping myself and my life experiences to shreds. But at the same time, I felt like I was behind this curtain, so to speak, like somewhat sheer, and I could see out and I could see my life and my loved ones and the rest of the world on the other side of that curtain, but I felt stuck behind it and it blurred everything and took me away from everyone. And I would be on the phone with friends and just feel out of it. And that was really hard. I remember at times questioning, why am I even here? Why does it matter? And that was low. I would see the news. I was obsessed with it, kind of watching the numbers and, hearing the people around me speak about politics and corruption and all of the hurt and pain that's going on in the world. And I felt like that was all that I could focus on. That and what a disaster I was. So there was very little hope. My light felt dim. It absolutely felt dim. But one thing that I felt had shifted since 2019 was that the fear was no longer there. Granted, it was scary. It felt incredibly scary waking up and having anxiety attacks or numbness, depending on the day and the time. But at the same time, that was the summer that I accepted that I struggle with mental illness. That was the summer that when people would ask, how are you doing? I would say, I'm struggling a little bit right now, but I'm still taking it step by step. I'm taking it day by day. That was the summer that in the spare time that I had the energy, I poured over literature about depression and anxiety, and I connected and resonated with the symptoms and felt a sense of comfort because it made sense. Like, here it was on paper, this seemingly overwhelming dark cloud that I felt disconnected me from so many people. It turns out it has been captured by science, and millions, if not billions, of us do or have or will have experienced it ourselves or through loved ones at some point in our lives. And that is where the switch went off. That is when I accepted myself. And it wasn't like an aha moment of joy. It was still very dark and foggy and numb at that time, but it made me take the pressure off myself to get over this. It allowed me to see that this was part of my life and that to best care for myself and continue on step by step, I didn't need to be hard on myself because it's not something that I was doing wrong and I needed to get over. It's just a part of me. And that's how I see it. I know that there's different theories and there's different perspectives on mental health and illness, and that's okay. But once again, this is my story, and I have decided to accept my mental illness as a part of me. I don't remember when it got easier. Actually, that's not true. I vaguely remember when it started to shift for me in 2020. So things had felt incredibly dark once again over the course of the spring and summer, just like 2019. But it took me taking small steps, going back to my home rather than staying bundled and cocooned, feeling safe but stagnant at my parents' place. It took me going for walks. It took me submitting occasional resumes to job applications and going through an interview process. It took me deciding whether or not I was going to accept the offer to return back to my previous company when my layoff period ended. All these little steps while continuing to go to therapy and being very honest and real whenever a loved one asked me how I was doing, it started to shift things and my experience became a lot sunnier. It felt like that curtain, that filter, so to speak, lifted. I could see things in full color again. I was starting to experience emotions that weren't clouded with either numbness or anxiety, and it felt good. 2021 has not been perfect. I once again have had seasons where I have to say hi to my pal's anxiety or depression. Actually, anxiety is a pretty constant companion, but depression will poke her head in and out during different portions of the year. And having accepted that this is part of my reality, I've just been taking it slower. I have continued therapy. I have been very open with my loved ones through this year. I've started keeping an eye on my sleeping routine. I've worked to eat 3 meals a day because that's what makes my body feel good, but not something that I was doing as often because anxiety killed my appetite a little bit. So just kind of slowly but surely getting my body to a more nourished and well-rested and slow living space. I have more recently, towards the later end of 2021, found a GP who diagnosed me with clinical depression. And I have continued therapy and started on the journey of taking a medication that is new, but it makes things a little bit easier. It gives me a little bit more support. Now, I'm not going to be listing labels. Once again, it's important that you see a therapist, psychologist, GP, if you'd like to learn more about yourself. I'm not a professional. I am just a human being who is sitting here and being open and vulnerable about my own experience so that someone out there can recognize that others have been scared too. Others have been alone too. I remember in 2019, at the peak of my depressive episode, standing in a field at an event that I didn't want to be at and feeling, even though I was surrounded by more people than I've seen in the past 2 years combined, feeling so alone and so disconnected. And that's a common feeling that I think deserves to be squashed. And I think that I think it can be replaced with understanding and self-kindness and better care towards ourselves and our mental well-being and mental health. And maybe it'll just be a few of my loved ones that see this video, but if anyone stumbles in here that's new and hasn't heard my story, I am sending you care and showing you that although this is not perfect, this is not an after, I wouldn't really consider myself a before and after because I'm not a project to be fixed, just to show that a bit of work and a bit of self-kindness, it can go a long way. And once again, we're not alone in this. I don't want to end on a cliche, so I'm going to take a sip of tea because I feel like that's a good note to end off on. Thank you for sitting in on this one. It was a bit more challenging to film. It felt a little intimidating, but it also felt important. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I truly hope that you have a wonderful day or evening wherever in the world you may be. Bye, guys.